First of all, it's a pleasure, Doug, to have you here with the Association of Logistics from Ecuador. We would like to discuss your ideas in reference to team. One thing that is important to mention to everyone that is listening to or watching this conversation is that Doug is an author of many books. Maybe the most famous book that he co-authored is The Wisdom of Teams, and the second one is The Discipline of Teams. Right now, you're working more in strategy, in performance-driven change. So one thing that we want to understand is how to build teams. For supply chain, is something important to start working in teams since we cannot work alone. So what ideas can you give us related to building teams?
Well, Santiago, thank you for having me here, and it's a pleasure to talk with you and your audience. So let's talk about team first. I would like to actually get beyond team at some point in the conversation. But with regard to team, there's some very important ways of thinking about that we should start with. First of all, we should talk about small groups. So very quickly, your audience probably will be familiar with the experience of working for a large company, and somebody in the large company says, "We're all a team." And when they say that, they are really trying to communicate we need to work together for success and so on. That when John Kassenbach and I wrote The Wisdom of Teams, we were not talking about big, large groups who say things like we're all a team. That doesn't mean we were against that. We were just saying, look, we're talking about a small group. Second point, team is often used even in a small group conversation as teamwork. And again, I'm going to be speaking in English, so I hope this will all translate well. Often many people think about the word team as teamwork in the sense of getting along with one another and wishing each other the best and so forth. Teamwork is very crucial, but it is not the same as what we call the team discipline for delivering performance. So let me just say very quickly that if you have a small group who are trying to get one or more things done, there really are two disciplines that the small group need to be very good at using, knowing when to use and using. The two disciplines are, first, the very familiar discipline of a boss. There's nobody anywhere on the planet who doesn't understand what it means to have a boss in a small group. We call that the single leader discipline. In Wisdom of Teams, we called it the working group discipline. But single leader is better language. It's the very familiar experience of being in a small group and there's a boss. The other discipline is the team discipline. The 6 parts of the team discipline are a small number of people with complementary skills who have a shared purpose, a shared set of specific performance goals, a shared and agreed upon way of working with one another to all of which the purpose, the goals, and the ways of working together, they hold themselves both individually and as a group mutually accountable. So 6 parts. That is important to contrast with the single leader discipline. In the single leader discipline, Santiago, if you're my boss and the boss of 4 other people or 10 other people, whatever it may be, we know that you are supposed to make decisions, assign each of us our work or our jobs to be done. You are going to hold us individually accountable for our work and the results that we need to achieve. You're going to encourage, as I say, good teamwork, getting along with one another, listening, trying to help each other with each of our respective individual jobs. There's more to it than that, but that's a very familiar discipline. It is the dominant discipline for any small group anywhere on the planet, anywhere. If that group walked into a room, that's what they would expect to happen, because this is how we work in organizations. The next key point, and then I'll stop to see if you have questions. How do you choose between the 2 disciplines? When do you use single leader? When do you use team? The answer is, what's the performance objective? If a small group have performance goals and objectives that can be accomplished and achieved through the sum, SUM in English, the sum of individual best performances, use the single leader discipline. It's familiar, everybody knows it. Yes, it can be problematic if there's a, quote, bad boss. A lot of people have not great bosses. That's a different issue. But assume for the moment a decent boss, good set of relationships. If you can achieve the results through each individual doing his, her, or their job, then it's familiar. Why wouldn't you use it? On the other hand, if the group has one or more performance objectives or goals that cannot be achieved that way, that demand the real-time working together and integration of multiple skills and perspectives, and when I say real-time, I mean between meetings. If you have a group of people and 2 or more of them for any particular goal need to work together that way, then you have to use the team discipline. You have to. Otherwise, you will not achieve the overall performance goals. You may get some way there with the individual contributions, but you're not going to get all the way there. So what's crucial here is that any small group needs to look at what they're trying to achieve. What are they required to achieve for themselves or from their respective bosses in the organization, or in the collaboration across 2 or more companies or whatever? What are they trying to achieve? How does that translate into specific performance goals? And then look at each goal and say, can this be done through the sum of individual contributions? Great, single leader. Does this demand 2 or more of us in the group to work together in real time between meetings, putting our thinking caps, collaboration hats, etc., in order to achieve the goal? Notice that I said 2 or more, because it's typically the case that in any small group, if you need the team discipline, it's not that you need that from the whole group. You need it from subsets of the group. And people make a common mistake of thinking, they make 2 common mistakes. One, here we are as a group. do we need to be single leader as a whole, or do we need to be team as a whole? That's a big mistake, because you're looking at the whole instead of the separate items of what we have to accomplish. That's the way you're supposed to go about it. And then in the separate items, if you need the team discipline, it's typically the case it's a subset who have to work together that way, not the whole group.
Perfect. That's actually really interesting. So we have two options, like the single leader discipline, the team discipline, and since supply chain must manage both type of decisions. One is regular production, logistic management, warehouse, and things like that you must repeat and repeat many times. I must say, in that case, you most of the time should manage the single leader discipline. However, since COVID, things got really, really difficult for the supply chain. Since the war with Ukraine, and right now we have troubles in the Panama Canal and things like that. So climate change is another important issue. We cannot keep up with this single leader discipline in the whole supply chain. I must say, we still need like a good direction. We still need to have the sum of the parts and everyone working together. So how we can manage this combination of both things, because we need to keep doing the things as always and in an efficient way. Plus, we need to be more flexible and resilient to solve these difficult problems. So how we mix these two disciplines?
So one of the ways to begin, again, it's with respect to any piece of work, any objective. Shifting quickly from physical reality to virtual in COVID. That everybody had to do that, to work virtually as opposed to at the office or something. Everybody had to do that. If I remember reading correctly over the last few weeks, and forgive me, but the water levels are difficult in the canal, and it's really difficult, and things aren't working the way they are supposed to work. So there you go. In baseball, that's called a curveball, right? They've been thrown a curveball. COVID threw us a curveball. So when you're in situations that have been moving along with a great deal of familiarity of we know how to do this, and then you get curveballs, we don't know how to do this. Anytime you have a we don't know how to do this situation on your hands, it's highly likely you need the team discipline. Because again, a crucial aspect of that is the real time between meetings, integration of multiple skills and perspectives in tackling a problem. You have to collaborate in real time. You have to draw on multiple perspectives of people and their experiences and skill base and so forth to solve a problem that they don't know how to do yet. That almost certainly requires the team discipline, because logically, just as a matter of pure logic, again, you're the boss of me and 5 other people, and we're thrown into the Panama Canal sort of situation or COVID. Prior to this, we've just been going along with single leader, each of us doing our job, getting along with one another and teamwork and everything, but just doing our job. And now all of a sudden, well, how do we work remotely? Or how do we deal with the size of the ships and the water level or whatever it might be? That's the curveball with the canal. Single leader means, Santiago, that you, as the boss, can figure out the approaches to any problem and have the confidence that by asking me to do X, the person over here Y, the person over here Z, it'll all work out. But in those situations of COVID in the canal, you don't know. You don't know either. So if you don't know, how in the world can you assign individual accountability for doing part of the work? You logically, that's an impossibility. That's why when small groups confront, we don't know how to do X or we don't know how to do Y, they need the team discipline. It just goes without saying. Now that can arise from the external context of the curveballs. But I want to point out one more thing. Let's say that in the logistics or supply chain context, there's no COVID, no Panama Canal. We are, in fact, very capable. We can use single leader. And then our company we work for says, you know, we're really great at solving a certain kind of problem, and the speed and effectiveness is, you know, we do something it takes us 3 days, but that's really good. It takes us 3 days to do something, okay? But then, you know, some strategist up there or chief executive officer, you know, turns to the whole organization and says, we want to do it in 1 day. So we want to go from 3 days to 1 day, or we want to go from 3 days to a half a day, or from 3 days to an hour. When organizations aspire to dramatic rises in their effectiveness and their performance, that's another form of curveball. Because if we're doing some process and it's 3 days, but now we're supposed to do it in 4 hours, we don't know how to do that. So it all comes back to, if you face, whether externally imposed or internally imposed or a blend, we don't know how aspects that the small group again, needs to figure out. Well, you're looking at the team discipline. I guess one more point would be, if there was some sort of situation where we wanted to go from 3 days to 4 hours for some process or something, there's also a high likelihood that would involve more than just our small group. It would involve all groups across the process. And by the way, in an aspiration like that, it might well involve groups who aren't even in our company. There are suppliers or whatever. If you think about net zero, we want a supply chain to have a net zero carbon footprint or whatever it might be, that doesn't get resolved by one company. It has to be resolved by the ecosystem or the supply chain. So again, that's a situation where groups have to work with groups beyond their own company, certainly with other groups and cross-functional sort of things. Logistics require that. Well, again, then you've got we don't know how to do this aspect. So team becomes crucial. The team discipline becomes crucial.
Another thing, when we talk about things, most of the companies take training about leadership. Everyone wants to be a leader in the company. One thing that I always find difficult to understand, if you have too many leaders actually who will lead, and then you have a conflict with that single leader idea. And the other thing is, many people don't get the idea of what really a leader is, and maybe they think that it's just the person with power and in charge, and that's pretty much how it works. But I haven't seen really companies working in building teams. One thing is to have regular meetings. Other thing is like going outside and trying to work together and having a good time. But actually, you're facing like or trying to solve games and things like that, but it's not the same as building teams. So what is the essence to build really a team? Because we can write it down and put good words around that, and we say that we trust in each other and we should collaborate, but then you are facing real problems where most of the times you are not going to have the solution, and you are going to make a lot of mistakes until you finally figure out the solution. But in the way, maybe someone is going to blame each other, and then you build the foundation of any collaboration system, that is trust. So how we can develop teams even before problems come, but not building just by saying things, but actually by creating these bounds between each other.
That's a great question. So first, so much of Western culture is grounded in deep perspective about the hero. I'm not an expert, a cross-cultural expert. I don't claim to be. I think it's fair to say that in Western culture, the hero is the protagonist of so many stories and so forth. That really matters because it helps explain, it helps deepen our understanding of the hierarchy, that as the economy went through hugely dramatic changes in the middle to the late 19th century, all the way through the 20th century, and we became, which we are today, a world of markets and networks and organizations. That's it. That's the world we live in. Organizations themselves are the main context in which people come together to do something together. And those organizations, again, through the Western influence and the influence of industrial development and organization development, I mean, even going back to time and motion studies, the learning curve and other things we've talked about, if you even go back 100 years, the birth of, quote, leadership is coincident with with hierarchy and with the role of the boss. So single leader, that leadership is single leader. That's how we grow up. That's how we think. It's pretty deep. It's like woven into the fabric. And now, and this isn't just last year, but I would argue over the last 50 years, there have been an increasing number of we don't know how challenges. And our whole way of thinking is to go back to leadership, and it's premised on the hero, on the single leader. Not to mention the incentives and cultures and so forth of any enterprise, to speak almost all enterprises, for those who have the ambition of wanting to rise. So even the word itself, rise, is a hierarchical word, that the hierarchy is a ladder, and each rung of the ladder is centered on being a boss, being an individual leader. So that's a lot to work against. That's a lot to work against. Next, another aspect of Western culture is that people learn in the classroom. I mean, who amongst us have not had their most dominant or prevailing learning experience from age 5 to age 25, whatever it might be, of being in classrooms with an instructor? So the classroom has a hierarchy too, and the experience and indeed theory of learning is that you learn by listening and reading and thinking. You don't learn by doing. Now, again, of course, there are many exceptions to this. I'm not saying there aren't, but if you said, where does the center of gravity, where's the balance? Just the balance is leaders are individuals. The balance is that you learn by being trained. And again, as in the example with you as our boss in a we don't know how situation where you can't figure out what to tell me, what I should be doing because you don't know the answer either. If you're the teacher in a situation of a don't know how, what are you teaching? And how are we learning? So both of those, and there are others, but both of those powerfully reinforce that we, if you're in an organization with any kind of resources, if you're in a small company, they don't even have the resources to do this, but if you're in any kind of organization that has resources that thinks about, quote, development, that development is thought about in a training perspective and so forth. Where the reality here is the team discipline and indeed those challenges we face that we don't know how to do it, and the learning necessary for that, it has to happen in the real world. It has to happen by doing, not by being trained. And that would include then the team discipline as something that we don't normally know how to do. Well, then the way to learn it is, and this is crucial, the way to learn it is not to have me or you go into a setting with 12 people in a company and do exactly what I've just done, which is to try to articulate the differences and so forth. That has a value. What we're doing today has a value. At the end of the day, though, how do you know how to pick between performance that's going to be doable, single leader versus team? If it isn't the whole group who needs to be the team, who do you put on that? What is the experience and guide that we might put toward leadership? For example, in the team discipline, leadership has to be shared. And yet, at the start of anything with people who are not familiar with the team discipline, there is a role for the boss. But the boss has to know that that role is to, as quickly as possible, let shared leadership emerge. If the boss is stuck in, I make the decisions, I listen, I contemplate what everybody are, and then I'm the judge, I'm the wise person who makes the best decision and communicates it, that's not going to lead to the practice of the team discipline. So learn by doing is crucial. Shared leadership that needs to emerge is crucial. And it can only be done best in real live situations, not the classroom.
Perfect. One thing that always is difficult to measure in teams too. Actually, you have this book, Make Success Measurable, is how to measure things, because when we talk about companies and industries, we have different ladders and we have different hierarchical systems that sometimes they are competing between each other. So you can put like to some part of the company, these are your objectives. To other part of the company, these are your objectives too. So then if you start to check, some of those objectives are against the other part of the system. So how we can manage this when, for example, in a company they say in thinking about supply chain, they say you must reduce the cost of transportation system to one part of the company, and the other part of the company you must reduce the cost of warehouse system, and you must reduce the cost of production system. To reduce the cost, the best way to go is to produce a lot, and so the unit cost will go down. That everything will go to the warehouse, so the cost of the warehouse will go up. To reduce the cost of the warehouse, you must push everything outside of the warehouse a lot faster, so you can reduce the cost, and then you push the problem to other part of the system. So how we can build a system, having in mind that we always try to measure everything, but sometimes when we put objectives, we make objectives that create problems between different parts of an organization or an industry, because we're not seeing the big picture. We are just seeing like each silo uh, in this system, and we're trying to measure objectives by each silo, but at the end, we generate bigger problems.
Another really good question. So, well, I would encourage you to find something I wrote many years ago called the horizontal organization. It'll give more context for this. So let's start with if we are trying to reduce well, I mean, so you used a perfect example there about reducing costs. And the classical way to reduce costs is through standardization and a greater volume over less of a cost base, right? That's standard. The history of organization is functional. And we, a long time ago, lived in a world where standardization within a function worked pretty well to drive down costs of the whole, even though there were contradictions like the ones you mentioned. Those contradictions didn't, by their very nature, defeat the overall purpose of standardizing costs and increasing volume. So they had so much to gain through that approach that the contradictions were not crucial. But in a supply chain context of global supply chains, or any transnational supply chains, or even within a nation supply chains that are complex, in any of those, and then certainly even within a company, the best way to achieve performance results in a horizontal look. So first of all, this is not a functional look. It's a core workflow or core process or horizontal look that goes across two or more boundaries, functional boundaries. In that situation, you have to look at the flow that's cutting across functions. You need to, at the end of the flow, have what we call end of process objectives. End of process objectives. One of those objectives is lower the cost. Now, big red flags, big danger, sounds off when I hear a process point of view, just like you pointed, with the singular most important objective of lower cost, because not just the contradictions which you articulated very well, the overall effect for the past 40 to 50 years in effect, really worrying about shareholder value, about increasing the value of companies. That overall effect has centered on standardization and lowering costs. If you look at any of the tech companies, for example, they have a DNA that hates labor. They want to replace people with code. That's all, to drive down costs. There's a drive down cost. There's a problem with that because nobody wants to intentionally destroy value creation. Value for whom? For example, the customers, whether they're business customers or whatever. But if you maniacally only try to drive down costs, especially if you're doing it in a functional way, but it's a process problem, you're going to do real damage to your product or service. You're going to do real damage to the customer experience. You are, in fact, going to hurt value. If you think about the typical experience of pretty much any human being on the planet with customer service, which is terrible, that's a direct manifestation of companies that are stuck thinking about lowering costs without paying any attention to value. So one, you need to take the process perspective, not the functional perspective. You need to have some group own the process, and that is not going to be a single boss. That's going to be a team. They're going to have to take the team discipline if they own the whole process. The CEO, CFO, the C-suite, the chief executives, yes, they can turn to the logistics process, if you will, and the team that owns one or more of those processes and say, we want to reduce cost. They'll make a mistake if they don't say, we do want to reduce cost, but we also want to either maintain or even increase the value experience of those we serve. Now you have a healthy relationship between goals. They're in tension with one another, but you can find the healthy tension when you at least include it as opposed to not include it. But they need to turn to the team and to say, come back to us with what your end of process objectives and goals are. They can set the direction. They can even maybe give some, double the quality and cut the time in half or whatever. Try that out, but come back. There has to be a dialogue between the people who own it and the people up above, and the people who own it have to own the goals. Now, if you have that, within the bounds of the complexity of the problem and realities and whatever, you're in a much better position to actually solve it if the people involved in the process and who own the process are in effect setting the end of process objectives. But that doesn't happen, does it, Santiago? Because what happens again in our habits of the way companies run, and nobody's bad here, but we have habits, right? And the habits are, there's some very smart people who figure out how all the functions and everything and what their goals are and how it all sort of theoretically adds up. And then they announce it and they what's called cascade down the goals. They tend to be functional, and it's they're deluded. It's a great self-delusion.
You mentioned this horizontal organization that actually is working with teams, and then you mentioned the word performance in this horizontal organization. One thing that you have been talking lately is about this performance-driven change. How does that idea works inside the organization? How this performance-driven change work? how we apply it, and for what purpose we use it.
Yeah. So within a company, let's go back to, we know how to do this, we don't know how to do this. The culture of most companies apply approaches to management that come out of we know how practices. So if we have a logistics problem or opportunity, and we know how to do it, then we should make really good decisions. We should communicate and get so-called buy-in to those decisions. We should expect bosses to assign people what they need to do. And that is what I call decision-driven change. It's still a change. We're doing something that's different in some way, but we know how to do it, and therefore decisions. And this is the classic role of top management, is to make and communicate good decisions and hold people accountable for implementing those decisions. So there is just like the single leader approach in a small group, decision-driven change or decision-driven approaches is the water we swim in. It's what we were taught. It's what we practice. That's great if the people in the organization who need to implement the decision know how. If they have the skills, the behaviors, the attitudes, and the ways of working with one another to implement the decisions, then that's great. But what happens when we make a decision, but a critical number of the people who are going to have to implement the decision don't have the skills? They don't have the behaviors or attitudes or ways of working with one another to implement the decision. So that's what I call behavior and skill-based change. It does require decisions. This is very, very crucial. It does. Of course, it requires decisions. But it's a different management challenge than implementing things people know how to do after good decisions have been made and communicated. It's very different. As we talked about in some of the earlier part of this discussion, people have to learn by doing. They have to learn new skills. They have to learn ways of working together and so forth that they don't know how to do. Well, the only way you learn something you don't know how to do is by doing it and seeing what works, what doesn't, making adjustments, and so forth. Now, performance-driven change actually does apply to both decisions and behavior. It really does, the key principles. It's more crucial, though, for behavior and skill-based change, because increasingly those are the most difficult problems that companies face. The way to make progress against behavior and skill-based change is, first of all, to define success, because clear goals are much more powerful to work with than, as I said, training is, as an example. When people have a clear goal, like real specific results or outcomes that they're trying to achieve, they're in a much better position to work together in real time on the aspects of those goals that they don't know how to do, and to ask themselves what's working, what's not. If you and I have a goal, you and I are going to do a marathon, Santiago, and it's our combined time that will determine how well we do. And we kind of know in the race last year what won in terms of time, or was top 10% or whatever our objective might be. And then we know our own personal times, and we know how we can work with one another throughout the race to, but we don't really, we know we have to do that. We're not quite sure, though, how to do it well and all that. By practicing and things like that and saying, well, is our combined time coming down or not coming down? What do we do to try to do better? That's what a clear goal is. If it's, let's enter this tandem race where you and I are going to do it together and sort of see what happens. I mean, that we're not going to learn. We're just going to go maybe have fun, which is great, but we're not going to learn. So when you have a clear goal and you can say, how are we getting to the goal? Are we not getting to the goal? What's working? What's not? If you don't have a goal, you can't really have that discussion. There's no context for it. So performance-driven change says the performance results are the primary objective of change, actually, not change. We do want the change. We want the improvement in logistics or whatever. But if we say, let's go improve our logistics, we have a bunch of training and thought exercises or whatever, but don't do it in real life, and we don't have people with the skills to pull it off, nothing much happens. Whereas if we set a clear goal and we put the process of the logistics to that and the people in it, they're going to learn by doing, but learn by doing with respect to a clear performance goal. So keeping performance as the primary objective is crucial. There are other principles involved in this, but that's the idea of performance-driven change. The idea of a challenge is also crucial. The other day I was talking with somebody interested in supply chain with regard to net zero, and this was in Europe, and the problem is that the big companies in any industry, they have a lot of good reasons that over the years they've signed up to various objectives of net zero. They have staff who worry about it. They comply with regulatory or information requests. They have the resources to do all of that. When you're talking about a supply chain, their suppliers might be small and medium-sized companies who don't have any of those resources. They don't have any of those resources. So where are they going to find the time and attention to actually do anything? So we were talking about it, and this is the context. They want to do something. Well, a challenge approach there would be, hey, could you get one big company and three small ones to share information in a way they haven't done before? It's to sort of carve out a piece of the overall problem. This is key. You have this overall problem. It's very complex. Carving out pieces and putting groups on those pieces is, they can get their arms around, they can make progress toward goals and so forth, as opposed to just sort of trying to write some giant map, what's called theory of change, for how the whole thing is going to work, and maybe people can actually do that, but then you go to implement it, and nobody knows how, and you're right back to square one. So within any given company, there's a difference between taking on a challenge that has been selected to provide opportunity for meaningful results versus the whole logistics process. That there's a key conceptual difference. The way you get to the whole logistic process, sure, have some thought about the design of it all, but then use challenges to help people learn the skills and perspectives necessary to get to that picture that you're trying. Not just sort of sit in one giant room with the picture and say, let's be that. Let's imagine, where's the action? Because if it's too big for any people to tackle on their own, they're not going to tackle it. So challenges help break up big problems into discrete pieces that real people can make progress against. And yes, the challenges need over time to add up to the whole, but it's a huge mistake to say we're going to address the whole all at once.
When you mentioned that we have these two things, performance-driven change and decision-driven change, most complex problems need actually performance-driven change. But then you face some people in organization that still have the mindset that I know everything. Since I have maybe the credential or the experience or something like that, I can solve everything. And it's more in that way of thinking, a decision-driven change or a single leader organization. How we tackle this problem when we need the performance-driven change and we have a people inside the organization that believe that is a decision-driven change, that we're facing a complex problem, but we still have parts of the team and the group that trying to take the decision, thinking that is just another problem that can be solved as always, as usual. So how we make that change and actually make them understand that is we don't know how to do it.
Yeah. So nobody goes through change, nobody, unless they are dissatisfied with the status quo, with the current state of affairs. If people are not dissatisfied, they won't change. As a quick example, a friend of yours smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day, has been to the doctor, not good news, shares that with you. You care about this friend and you're very upset, even angry. You've got to stop smoking. If the friend is not dissatisfied, the friend's not going to quit smoking. You cannot own your friend's dissatisfaction. Only your friend can be dissatisfied. Now, some people don't like that word, and so another way of saying is, unless a human being is motivated to change, they're not going to change. So dissatisfaction, motivation, that's fine. So let's take your example. We've got the Panama Canal issue that we talked about. Although again, because I'm in America and whatever, I only have been reading about this the last 2 weeks to a month. I don't know how long it's been around, but let's say people have been aware of it for a year. I'm just going to make that up, okay, for a year or 2 years. If people have been taking decision-driven approaches for a year, only one of 2 things can be true. They really do know how and to make the right decisions, and the people in the organization really do have the skills to implement the decisions, in which case they're making real progress toward the Panama situation. They are, which would be great. However, reading about it now over the last couple of weeks would be suggestive to me, well, they're not making real progress. So you could take that, you could take any logistics or whatever, and if you just look at the last year or 2 years or whatever is the right time frame, and people have been taking decision-driven approaches and they're not making progress, sharing that with them might make them dissatisfied a bit. You could share it with them just in general, or perhaps it comes time for yet another decision. And, you or somebody who's in a position to do so says, oh, that very interesting decision. Now, could you help me understand how this one's going to be different from the one we did a month ago, the one we did 3 months ago, the one we did 12 months ago, none of which seemed to really make enough progress. A little bit of progress, but not enough progress. Can you help me with that? So that's one way of going about it. Another way of going about it is to say, okay, here's the decision. Let's all go implement this decision and see what happens. And again, if their smartness and so forth, and people know how to do it, then if you make the progress, You don't want things to require behavior and skill change. You'd much prefer things to be decision driven. Everybody would. So sure, we'll take this approach, see what happens. Of course, it's likely to fail. And then it comes time to, well, why did it fail? Maybe there in that conversation of the debrief or so forth, or we're not making progress, we're still not making progress, and you have debrief conversations, what's happening here? That's another time in which you might say, well, maybe we don't know how to do this, and maybe this decision stuff isn't quite working well enough. So you have to think about who are the key players, the key people involved, and how do you work with them to help them tap into or come to a sense of, are they dissatisfied? Now, that's hard work, and it doesn't always succeed, because there are people like the 3-pack-a-day friend smoker who is going to die before stopping smoking. And again, nobody's bad here. They're just people being people. But if you think just for a quick second about the situation of a senior person who whose decisions and choices matter a lot, and that senior person is 2 years away from retirement. 2 years. They may not care. So there, when you have that situation, depending on who they are, you might start trying to engage them about what's the legacy that you want to leave this organization. And sometimes that can make them dissatisfied. So it's very crucial in these situations to know who isn't supportive that you feel you need. And again, what might be their sources of dissatisfaction, not your source of dissatisfaction. Now, let's say you are a senior executive and you are dissatisfied. Again, I work for you and I have a crucial role to play in whatever we're doing, but I'm not dissatisfied. But I'm your direct report. Well, you can make me dissatisfied. By demanding certain performance results out of me, you can make me dissatisfied. That works in a direct boss-subordinate situation. But if you're the senior person and I'm 2 levels or 3 levels or 4 levels down from you, it gets murkier. It gets more difficult, because you can't, if I'm 3 levels down from you, you can't walk into my office and demand something specific out of me. You have to work through the chain. So it gets complicated. But the key thing I'm trying to get across is you have to pay attention to the people you need to participate and what are their sources of dissatisfaction. You have to pay attention to, are they already supportive or not supportive? If they're already supportive, you need to pay attention to how to get them to commit to performance results so that they get going, learning things about we don't know how and so forth, so they learn how, while you're also navigating what in effect is the politics of the situation for those who are not supportive or on the fence or whatever, by trying to figure out yourself and with others, how might we get them to see their own dissatisfaction.
Well,
That is Santiago, that's reality. Okay, that's reality.
Actually, I think that's reality. Maybe in most organization or in all organization, since it's really a human issue, a behavioral issue on how to make everyone in the organization like having a purpose inside the organization. And most of the times we have an organization that have a vision, a mission inside the organization, but each member have different views, different ideas, and different goals in the organization and in life. And I think that is the most difficult part of this, as we put it, is having a common purpose. how to manage this common purpose. So, Doug, I would like first to thank you for all your time, and what final ideas and thoughts you can give us related on how to work this new challenge that we are facing, not only in the supply chain, but in whole systems in different industries, that we are facing challenges that are getting more and more difficult since we have climate change, geopolitical problems, and everything is getting difficult to manage. So we need to change our mindset to try to solve this problem. So what recommendations can you give us?
So I went to your website, and I clicked on Inicio, and I saw the 5 main sort of purposes or whatever. I didn't understand any of them, so I pasted them into a translation thing. And so I'm looking at them in English, okay? And what I would, if I were working with you, I would be focusing on the 3rd one. But let me tell you why. The first is exchanges of knowledge and stuff. Second one is best practices. The 4th one is professional education. The 5th one is technical assistance and training services. That'll come into what I'm saying in a moment. So I probably include that with the 3rd one. But notice that exchanges, best practices, education, again, they're really good things, but they're focused on the individual and the individual's professional development. It may be that you have company clients, but then it's the individuals in the company and so forth. So that's fine, okay? But that's not going to get you anywhere with what you and I have been talking about. But it says promote research and technological development. I put in some, because that of industry through logistics systems. That's my language, but because I was fighting through the translation. So think about that for a moment. In that, what the opportunity there is for you folks to say, here performance results, and why those performance results matter to you, to your shareholders, to your customers, whatever it is. Here are the performance results that are possible if we can only solve climate, if we can only solve this, if we can only solve that. Here's what they are. Here's where you are today. And that big gap between what's possible versus where you are today. We have a way of working with you that's going to increase the odds, no guarantees, but increase the odds that you'll achieve this. And then our technical assistance and everything, the 5th one, is there to help you with that. So I would be looking at the 3rd one because it really relates to performance of the enterprise. The first, 2nd, and 4th kind of don't. It's about individual development. And again, that's fine. I would be looking at the 3rd one and then trying to put together the technical assistance, etc., necessary to help companies achieve that. That's where I would go. And of course, given what you've heard us talk about, I'd be using the challenge-centric cohort architecture. And what that basically means is, if I were you guys, I would set up some kind of a program, 10 to 15 month program, where companies can apply and send leaders to the program, but it's explicit that those leaders come into the program, they have to have a challenge. They have to have a challenge. And clearly it would have to be a logistics related challenge. You might even go further and say it has to be a logistics related challenge that addresses some aspect of Panama, or the canal, or climate, or whatever. You could list one or more of the following, but they have to come in with a challenge. They might come in as individuals. They might come in as a small team. You can work that out. But the 10 to 15 month architecture and design is all focused on helping everybody who participates in their companies achieve success at the challenge. That's what I'd be doing. That's what I would be doing. Because again, it's a wonderful thing that you folks do with regard to these other purposes that you have. I don't want anybody to think I'm not saying that. But when the purpose is primarily best practice, learning, individual, etc., it doesn't make any progress toward these more complicated difficulties that their companies and therefore themselves are facing.
Okay, thanks. I think that will be really, really helpful for us actually to rethink how we approach this issue and how to help here in Ecuador our logistic and supply chain problems, plus in the region, since actually we work with her. So Doug, really thanks for all your time and help in this conversation.
Well, Santiago, thank you. This was a lot of fun to meet you more and talk through these important issues that people face. So thank you.